Welcome back to What's Your Take? Real talk on leadership and life. I'm your host, Dr. Nikki, the DBA pharmacist and founder of FitBiz Global Solutions. This is the space where we unpack what leadership, innovation, and wellness really look like today. The real stories, the shifts, and the lessons that shape how we show up and lead. Today, we're diving into something that's been on everyone's radar. The shift in leadership expectations. And I'm excited about this one because we're unpacking what leadership looks like now. Expectations have changed, and the way we lead, connect, and show up for others is evolving every day. So how are leaders adapting in a world that's more connected, more transparent, and let's be honest, more demanding than ever? I'm joined by Alcindor Bonamy, General Manager and Professional Project Engineer at a major petroleum company in the Caribbean, and Zanda Bonamy, Director of Health, Safety, and Environment at a major power company in the Caribbean. Together, we're breaking down what's changing, what's staying the same, and how leaders can thrive in this new era. Let's get into it. Before we dive in too deep, let's loosen up with a few quick round questions I like to call What's Your Take? So it's quick fire, so no overthinking, just gut answers. I'll start with Al. What's the worst leadership advice you've ever received? Or what's one leadership myth you think needs to go?
Thank you for that, Dr. Nikki. For me, I'll take the one on what's the worst leadership advice I've ever received. And if I think about it, that would say, play it safe, avoid risks. And in my profession as a chemical engineer, avoiding risk creates risk. If we think about systems, pressure builds, systems destabilize. Any small deviation that you could have in the design becomes major failures. So leadership requires deliberate, informed risk. If we think as in the way of a process engineer thinks, you take control risks to optimize performance. And progress, really, if we think about it from leadership, is never achieved by standing still. So if I look at it for leadership from a chemical engineering process and say apply it to people, it's about never confusing stability with stagnation. Leadership is not about, trying to maintain the status quo. It's about raising the energy within people, improving their efficiencies, teaching them how to find better ways of doing things, and ensuring that each and every day you find ways of them becoming a better version of themselves. So that's my take. I think that's the worst leadership advice. Play it safe and avoid risk. Risk is inevitable. It's always there.
Okay, so Z, I don't know which one you want to go for. I can repeat those again. What's the worst leadership advice you've ever received? Or what's one leadership myth you think needs to go?
Okay, I'll take leadership myth for 100. So the leadership myth I would say is leaders must be charismatic. Charisma can, I know people like it when people are charismatic and it can win the crowd. But I have found that people really love the concept of authentic leadership. They like when people are real, to be as transparent as possible. And, I think it really helps to predict how well an organization would perform if the leader is more authentic.
Okay, great answers. So let's start this dive in, okay? Into the next segment, we're going to talk about what's changing in leadership. So let's talk about the shift. Over the last decade, with remote work, Gen Z entering the workforce, mental health awareness, and global transparency, leadership doesn't look like it used to. So I'll start here. How do you think the expectations of leaders have changed in the past 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I'm actually going to continue off with something that Z had said in terms of leadership myth. And from what I gather from Z, it's all about, being in a changing environment. So I would say then it's about adaptation. So we've moved from a world of management to a world of adaptation. So if we think about, 5, 10, 10 years ago, maybe 15, leaders were measured on how well they control the environment. It was all about doing the status quo. Today, I think leaders, they're measured by how well they respond to environments they can't control. Because the environment, you are subject to your environment. And there are so many factors that are changing around us. So it's no longer enough to be technically strong or operationally sound. For leaders, we must be emotionally intelligent, data literate, because things are moving at the speed of thought with AI and the way in which technology is moving at lightning speed. I think in this case, Moore's law, in some instances, people say no longer apply because how quickly things are changing. And as leaders, we must be able, again, to adapt to that. We must be transparent. And last but not least, we must be able to navigate uncertainty. So it's not only about managing dynamic systems with volatile inputs, and those inputs are people. As leaders, on any particular day, the person that you're dealing with on the next day could be different. It depends on, when they woke up out of bed, how they interacted with their family, what conditions existed on the road as they were coming to work. So that's one thing you have to manage, because that's a part of your input in terms of what you need to manage, because people is key. It's also about the technology. And it's also about global shocks as well. I think the pandemic was one of the more defining moments as leaders, because there was all these changes that occurred. So to round it up, a leader today is expected to sense, respond, and recalibrate in real time. So emotional intelligence is no longer optional. Data literacy has become really a leadership requirement, and authenticity and transparency matter more than hierarchy. So people no longer follow titles. They follow truth, clarity, and purpose. So leaders must be able to communicate openly, even when they don't have every answers. And they must be comfortable enough with their team to say, you know what, I don't know all the answers, but as a group coming out of here, we will be able to find that answer. And that's what people look for. Like, you may not have to be the smartest person in the room, but you need to be able to be that person that brings all of that together, and people be like, yep, that's the leader that we need. So I think that's one of the key expectations that has changed in the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And honestly, in my research, when I looked at strategies for effective leaderships, when we talk about implementation of technology, one of the things, or two of the things that you mentioned, came up as major themes, which was communication. And then also emerging technology was also something that was very vital in being successful in those implementations. Z, I'm going to ask you, have you noticed any specific moments where you realized, wow, things are different now?
Leaders try to be more visible now, I think, than before. I think they realize that their staff, the organization, needs their presence. Also, another one, a big one, is because Alcindor would have destroyed several myths just now. Leaders must be in complete control, they must be perfect. And he talked about being aware of people's, I think, mental state, especially after COVID. Leaders have to be mindful of that. I think that's one of the reasons why in some workspaces they've even went from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week. You would find businesses don't stay open as late as they used to, because the staff just wouldn't come into work, because they realized that they could live off less and survive. So they had to shift in that regard. So that, I think, mainly the mental health aspect, you have to be very mindful. People aren't joking. I think people start to realize that if someone says something where they may harm themselves or another individual, they have to take that seriously. So yeah, I guess that also supports Alcindor's point about pivoting in real time. So I would think it's mainly that one that really stood out for me. The emotional intelligence seems to have to be higher even more higher than IQ. The EQ has to match.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I discovered quite a bit during my research was things like the burnout. And I think me personally, from my own experience, when we did that switch to remote work, when the pandemic broke, like in for March of 2020 was when, the organization I worked with decided we're all going to stay home. What we were in like go mode because it was new for us. So I think a lot of us suffered from possibly burnout. And that's something that I'll probably discuss in one of my later episodes. And so let me pivot into the next segment, which is the impact of these shifts. Now that we've unpacked what's changing, let's talk about the impact. Who is really thriving in this new leadership landscape and who's struggling to keep up?
Now, for all the listeners out there, they may see this as potentially biased. However, based upon, me and reviewing what's happening today, I would say it would be the students of STEM. So science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Right? I think, and rightfully so, you see a lot of countries pushing STEM. And so we need to have a little deeper dive, I would say, into that. And if I can think just on the surface of it, I think the people who excel today are students of STEM. They think like, for lack of a better word, they think like engineers, right? They anticipate variability, they respond to change, they adjust in real time. These leaders understand that every team, they have pressure points, how the energy is flowing within the team. You have to be able to lead with emotional clarity, not ego. So leaders today who thrive, they know how to read the room. So they regulate their own energy and communicate that with transparency. They understand that people perform best when they really feel safe, they feel supported and informed. Also, most definitely, I think that they are technology literate. We open up this segment talking about technology. You, Dr. Nikki, talked about your research in technology as well, and so you need to not be coders, but really translators. So leaders thrive are the ones who embrace the change. They embrace AI, they embrace data, automation, digital systems, and they look at it as an extension of their own leadership toolkit. So they don't fear technology, they integrate it.
Okay, that was quite insightful. You mentioned STEM, and I was going to come into that, pivot into that. In industries like STEM, healthcare, and wellness, and tech. How are leaders balancing innovation, people, and pressure? Probably could piggyback off what Al said a bit, but if you want to elaborate on that a bit more, how are leaders balancing innovation, people, and pressure?
That's a heavy question. You say how they balancing innovation, people, and pressure?
Yeah, in industries like STEM, tech, healthcare, and wellness.
I think Al said everything. I mean, in some instances, they need to phase out some leaders. In the Caribbean, people tend to stay on a little bit longer than they should, and I think they need to be re-educated in areas of innovation. I don't think the leaders of a certain generation are handling it too well, actually. Who would be from the baby boomers? I think that a lot of them are still in leadership roles, and there are a lot of conflict. So I actually think they need to be re-educated.
It's good you should mention that because it brings me on to what I was going to ask anyway. What's one outdated leadership practice you think we should finally retire? So you could take that and then I'll bring in the end of that.
One outdated is I feel they need to delegate more. A lot of the leaders still want to be in complete control. I know charisma isn't natural, you don't have to have it. But some of them, they're not charismatic enough. You have to have a delicate balance. Yeah. They have to not hoard information, and they need to make information more readily available. Some of these, the industrial knowledge isn't easily shared,
Yeah, what do you think about that? What's one outdated leadership practice you think we should finally retire?
No, okay, wow. I think the one that we most definitely need to retire is leaders who operates with emotional distance. So, there's a old saying, you stay detached and you stay focused on results and mindset. And this worked probably decades ago when the work was repetitive, it was predictable. But again, we started the segment talking about the world that is dynamic. And you have to be in tune with the team. So a leader who shows no emotional presence is, and I'm thinking again, in chemical engineering, is a process with no temperature feedback. Is the system will drift, will destabilize, and it eventually fails. And so modern teams, they need authenticity. Z talked about the psychological safety. You need to have human connection. Leaders, you need leaders who listen and recalibrate. Right. So in summary, I think the era of the emotionally distant leader is over. If you can't feel the team, you can't lead the team. It's really as simple as that.
I totally agree with you with that. A lot
I
of
like that
times
one.
people want to separate. You could go see. A lot of times people want to separate the work from the personal, and I definitely agree you should separate it. But you must understand what your team, whoever you lead, is actually going through. And I see that a lot. Unfortunately, but generations who still lead that, Z said should probably retire. They want to keep it like that. Oh, I don't know. I don't really care what's going on with you. I just need the job done. No, you need to consider what someone is going through. Z, what do you want to say about that?
No, I like what Al said. I think that should become merchant. I'll say if you can't feel the team, you can't lead the team.
That's a powerful statement right there.
That's a good
That's
one.
probably gonna be a viral point right there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I'm not saying I don't want people to think this is an attack. It's just that I'll use an example of the rotary phone. I had to look up online how to use that again. I remember using it as a child, but they got phased out a long time ago. It's nostalgic. I see, the phone booth's still there and they still connected, some of them. They had to start disconnecting them. You put your quarter in and you make a call. Gen Z don't know anything about that.
No clue.
Okay, they definitely don't know about the rotary phone. Does that mean they don't know things? No. The time has passed. And my thing is a certain country I read sent their people back to school over 40. Okay, if you are not in active studies, they send them back to learn the computers, to learn certain things. Because if you're not in active studies, there are just certain things you would not be privy to. Certain research methodologies, you wouldn't know about certain AI technology, you wouldn't know because your job hasn't reached that point, hasn't caught up to technology yet. And that's the reality. A lot of jobs, and when it does, it's a problem. There are people who don't know how to use the computers sometimes. They're not computer literate. But if you're not in a leadership role, it may not impact you as much. But the challenge is when you're in a leadership role and you're expected to think outside the box and be quick, it becomes a little challenging the older we get, and that's just a reality. That's just reality. There are things I can't do that my child can do on the phone. I have to ask her for help. That's just how it is. I think the problem is, like I'll say it again about control, about caring about what your staff are saying and all of that. Leaders, they're afraid. I understand if you're in a leadership role and you need help from your staff, then they may talk bad about you. You may not know how to do certain things, but that's where being authentic comes in. Like I'll say you ain't gonna know the answers every time inside the room. So yeah, that's the point I want to make.
Yeah, that's well said. Very well said. I think one of the things I wanted to point out too is about knowing, because I think I came across this, the difference between management and leadership as well. And I know sometimes they all get intertwined, but there's a difference. Some people, they manage well, but they can't lead. I know. Yeah, I know. And some people lead. I think in my experience, usually if you're a good leader, you know how to manage. You do. But in my experience, I've seen managers who have no idea what leadership looks like. They maybe just were placed there. And I think a lot of times they're more transactional. So I think when people are appointing people in positions, when they're considering leadership, they need to know if they are appointing a leader or a manager or both. And I think that's just something to consider when we're looking at the shift in leadership. And that brings me to the end of our segment. And I just want to say that this has been a very good conversation. We discussed many insights on what it really means to lead in today's world, considering generations who are older, considering the younger generation. If there's one thing I'm taking away is that leadership is evolving. I think you both can agree.
Yeah.
And those who listen, adapt, and lead with empathy are the ones shaping the future, not just reacting to it. I don't know if Al, you wanted to add something to that.
Yes, Dr. Nikki. So there's one thing we were talking about leaders, and I think the one thing that persons fear is not knowing all the answers. But you had highlighted something earlier about innovation, people, and pressure. And I think a key point here is you have to allow creativity without destabilizing the system. So leaders need to create small, safe spaces that persons can have in a test environment, because this prevents innovation shock, right? Leaders have to recognize that burned out teams cannot innovate. And this is key, because what happens ideally is we feel sometimes, old school leaders, that you have to be on top of persons all the time and micromanaging them. Micromanagement leadership does not work, because you have to allow persons to be creative. And persons being creative means that they think independently from you, and they don't process and do things the same way that you do, but it does not mean that they do not bring value to the team. So I think that's one of the key things we as leaders, current leaders and future leaders, need to remember. Creativity, we must allow it. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point. And what I want to say to listeners out there, if you're looking for more ways to lead well in life, in business, and wellness, you could head over to fitbizsolutions.com or check out our wellness store at fitbizwellness.com, because real leadership, it starts with how you show up for yourself and for others. Until next time, keep evolving and keep leading with purpose, because that's how we rise to meet the shift in leadership today. And if something in this conversation resonated with you, DM us your take, share a leadership win, or tag us on the show using What's Your Take podcast. So join me next Thursday for part 2, Leading with Purpose, Tech, and Wellness. We'll explore how purpose, innovation, and well-being intersect in the next era of leadership. Until next time, thank you.